to begin, I would love to hear a little bit about, like an in-depth introduction to who you guys are, your experience at St. John's, your major, et cetera, and where you are now. Samantha, you can go ahead first.
Okay, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So hi everyone, my name is Samantha Vega. I'm a recent graduate from St. John's University. I graduated in May 2021 with my degree in computer science with a concentration in networking and telecommunications. Not too long after my graduation, I started my role at Verizon as a data scientist. I currently work within their artificial intelligence organization, specifically on their market intelligence team. And what my team does is we conduct competitive analyses on the market and just ensure that Verizon is maintaining their network leadership. Happy to be here with you all and looking forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you. Quasi or Emily, whoever, you can go.
Yeah, I could jump in.
Okay, thanks.
So I graduated 2019. I am currently a part of the health organization of Twitter, and I work on building out the tooling and software for reporting flows and remediation. I studied computer science in undergrad.
Emily, if you want, you can also kind of give like a quick synopsis of what you study at St. John's.
So, hi everyone, my name is Emily. I'm so glad to be here. So I studied cybersecurity at St. John's and I graduated with my bachelor's in 2020. And right now I'm currently in the master's in cyber at St. John's as well. And I'm graduating this May. And right now I'm also currently working as a cybersecurity solutions advisor.
Yeah, and I have some like general questions for the three of you guys just to kind of like get the ball rolling. And like I mentioned, if any of the members have questions, please feel free to send them in the chat and like we'll get through them as time goes on. So with that, to begin, the first question is, how would you go about applying to jobs? Did you network, and walk us through the journey in landing your current position? If anyone wants to take the floor.
So my current job is actually my third job right now. So, and I got into this through networking. I knew somebody that had previously, well, currently still works at Twitter. And while I was sort of like doing interview prep and running through my practice interviews, I was talking to them about it, and they suggested that, they'd be happy to give me a referral, and they slid me with a referral. I used that opportunity to, like, kill that interview, and then like had a few other interviews and sort of like leveraged those offers and decided upon Twitter because the value proposition of what I do at Twitter is like something that I was interested in. And then I joined there. My very first job, I did freelance in undergrad, and through freelance, I got to know somebody through like the Angel List job application site. And I worked in a nonprofit CRM organization in which we were building out CRM tools for nonprofits to manage their like volunteers and their organizations, and encourage volunteering with corporations and corporate entities. After that, I then joined Liberty Mutual, where I worked for about 2 years, give or take, and building insurance pipelines and working, building web apps for Liberty.
Mm-hmm.
And through that was a cold application. Like Twitter was my very first like just straight up referral.
Okay.
I guess I'll go next. So to get my job at Verizon, it was a little bit of everything. I kept an Excel sheet of all of the jobs that I was applying for, and I gave myself a goal of applying for anywhere from 5 to 7 jobs every week. And in that Excel sheet, I would update it after every application I sent out, after every rejection email I received. And I went for a couple of interviews and I received a couple of offers, but I ultimately went with Verizon. And that was just an application, no referral. But yeah.
Yeah, it was really cool to hear, from Quasi having that referral versus you, Samantha, kind of going in, as they say, cold. A lot of people are kind of, debating the whole idea of, oh, if I don't have a referral, I can't really land that position, especially in like the tech industry. It's super competitive. So yeah, I always love to hear someone like that went through that journey. So Emily, yeah, if you could like go through kind of the whole process, that would be amazing.
So similar to Samantha's, I pretty much spent, I would say, the majority of the pandemic going through all these websites, LinkedIn, Monster, Indeed, just going through the job descriptions, reading, especially, I think the most important thing is to read the job description and really think about what you're going to be doing. Is this something I like? Do I follow directions? Do I work well in a team? Can I work under minimal supervision depending on that job description? And to me, I just kept applying on those websites, and I went through so many interviews. And honestly, you're going to go to that point where you're going to be rejected at certain places. And if you get rejected from a lot of places, the most important thing is not to give up. Especially during COVID, there were times that I just wanted to give up. And sometimes I was asking myself, why am I studying cybersecurity if no one wants to hire me? But, but eventually, toward, what was it? I believe the summer of last year, when things were picking up with the economy, I heard back from an employer right out in Long Island, actually. And they just came across my resume on Indeed, where I just uploaded it, and they were just like, oh, would you like to go for an interview? And I'm like, all right. So when it comes to these interviews, I think the most important thing is to just come prepared. Research, the important thing you can do is just to come prepared for that interview. Research the company, read the company mission. I think it's very important going in there, understanding what you're going to contribute to the company and how you're going to be an asset to them.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I just recently got a position at Deloitte as a strategy analyst, and that took, close to 300 internship applications. It was so discouraging, and I remember telling myself maybe I'm not cut out for this. Maybe I shouldn't be, on this path. So I completely relate to, your entire journey for sure. So I guess a good follow-up question to that would be, what does your day-to-day look like? What are your main responsibilities on the job? And I guess we can start with Kwesi, then Samantha, and then Emily. Just keep that order.
Do you mind if we sort of round robin, because I'm still thinking about it
right
now?
I got you. Okay,
So
yeah.
if
If
anybody's,
anyone else wants to go first, that's fine.
Let's go first then.
Okay, sure.
So for my day-to-day, what I would say is I typically, being a security advisor, essentially it's consulting. So I interact with a lot of clients. I go through health check reports of their environment, making sure that we're monitoring their endpoints. If there's anything that they're not happy with, they come to us. And if it's some issue, then I would escalate to the appropriate personnel, whether it's a SOC analyst or a network engineer. So the most important role of my position is not just my position, but anywhere in cybersecurity. You're going to be working with members of a SOC or a network engineer. And I think it's really important to be able to escalate in certain situations and working together with those teams. So essentially, I guess I would just say my day-to-day is just going through clients' reports, making sure their environment looks good, making sure there's nothing suspicious or malicious that's running in their environment, and onboarding clients as we get them. And it's pretty much my day-to-day in a nutshell.
Yeah, I appreciate that you mentioned how collaborative the whole tech community is. I feel like a lot of people have the misconception. I know I did for sure, because I started off as pre-med. So I'm relatively new to the whole CS space. I'm personally more computer science aligned, but I definitely know that my knowledge on cyber is not, I'm sure anywhere near where yours is. And it's definitely something that I want to ramp up, because I know the whole tech field is super collaborative, and it would be super helpful to kind of have more insight on that field. So yeah. Samantha, yeah, if you want to go and just kind of explain your main responsibilities day to day, yeah, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. And as I'm sure everyone can imagine, my day-to-day varies greatly, but the structure of my day really depends on what phase of a project I'm in. So if I'm in the initial phases, that can start off as a question from a business leader that they want us to look into, or maybe we have access to a new data set, and they kind of want to see what we can do with it, how it can relate. So if we're in early stages, a lot of my time is spent collaborating, speaking to different subject matter experts to understand the different nuances of the data that already exists, finding the right people to contact. If I'm in the analysis phase, a lot of time is spent cleaning data. There is no such thing as a pretty data set. Yes, a lot of time is spent cleaning data and putting it together, joining it with different data sets to extract different insights. And if I'm presenting the data, it's getting feedback from my managers, figuring out how I can best tell the story with the data, whether that be through a report, a PowerPoint presentation, or a visualization. So yeah, the structure really depends on what phase I would be in a project.
Quasi, you think you're ready?
Yeah, totally.
All right, perfect.
So my day-to-day is basically like I'm very like disingenuous of like the TikTok propaganda of like the typical software engineer. So I more or less like hop into work, and most of the time I am just sort of like working on a Jira ticket as a part of like our overall like driven approach. We take like a really documentation heavy approach here. So beforehand, it's me and our senior engineers and our junior engineers just sort of talking, looking at different angles to solve a problem. And we write a technical design document. That technical design document more or less plots out like the overarching goal that we want to reach. And then after that, we start coming up with tickets on our own. So my day is like fairly free form in the sense of like, I know the goal and I have enough freedom to more or less like look and see what we're working on. If I have to talk to someone about getting access to certain things, then I'll talk to someone about it. I would say for giving a breakdown of like how much I spend coding, I spend around like 60% of my day coding, and 40% of my day is basically reading documentation, learning a lot about like what I'm working with and like what I'm working on. And on top of that, more or less we have to go talk to like some people about like getting access to this or that. And I would say I like to split my day like heavy on the coding side, just so I can get into like those flow states, give or take. And because I have like so much freedom within my job, I'm able to like talk to my manager and tell them whether or not we're able to achieve something, or whether we need some more help or need some more headcount. And that's pretty much like what I've got going on.
Yeah, you actually answered my follow-up question. I wanted to know like what % of your day was actually spent coding. And I've actually heard just through like social media, like TikTok, whatever, like a day in my life from like software engineers, a lot of them say that the % of their day that is spent coding is a lot smaller than 60%. So I'm super like interested in hearing that so much of your day is actually spent coding. Super cool.
Yeah, I mean, coding is like, I mean, it's mainly because like this is how like I structure my day, having that much freedom to like make sure that I get to like work on what I want to work on. And that's also can be split differently. I do have like on-call rotations. So when I'm on call, there are days like where I spend none of my day coding and I'm just like walking through logs, talking to people, trying to figure out why something's breaking. And we have two different versions of on-call, which is daytime on-call and 24/7 on-call. So my daytime on-call is heavy on the like investigating, talking to people because they're also awake. And my nighttime on-call is where like I actually get like a little bit of coding done because of the fact that like I don't need to talk to as many people.
Okay, that's perfect. Got it. Okay, so I have two questions kind of aimed more towards like the members. If you don't mind, I promise I'm almost done. Okay, so a lot of us are at a crossroads of deciding whether or not we pursue a master's degree or kind of get straight into the work field. And I would love to hear some insight from you guys as to like what your opinions are on that.
Sure, I can start off if you guys want. For me personally, that's a really good question. I just started that master's during the pandemic when, you know, the whole economy was pretty much not so good. But I would say, I think it would be a good investment to start a master's degree as soon as you finish your bachelor's. I know some people like to take a gap year, but I feel that because how competitive the market is actually. I would definitely recommend investing in a master's degree. To me, obviously, balancing work and school it's a huge challenge, but it is something that's doable if you split your time wisely. And at the same time, besides pursuing a master's degree, I am more of a champion for the cybersecurity certs. So for instance, I currently have my Security Plus certification. I would highly, highly, highly recommend for those of you who are studying cybersecurity as well, I would highly recommend for you to get the CompTIA Security Plus first, and before you start off, once you start off that career, as well as a master's degree would be really very beneficial, especially if you're looking to go into much of a senior position or even a manager. That would be great to have.
I guess I can go next. Definitely want to echo what Emily said. I am all for master's degrees, but the timing of it is really circumstantial. I don't think there's a right answer to whether you should go right after college or take a gap year or a few years. I personally worked full-time while going to undergrad full-time in order to pay for my tuition. I'm a first-gen college student, and I had to work really hard to get to where I am today. And because of that, I didn't really have the option to pursue a master's degree right out of college. I couldn't afford to take on that financial burden at the time. But luckily enough, I do work at a company that does offer tuition assistance. And I'm currently studying for the GRE so that I can go back and get my master's degree. As a computer science major, it's a little bit general. So definitely looking to go back to get a master's degree in applied analytics or data science. But definitely want to echo the importance of it. But don't feel too pressured by the timing. A master's degree will always be there, and you can get it when you can.
I'm a big fan of when you can get someone else to pay for your master's degree. That'd be the most important thing that you can do, because personally I feel like master's degrees, especially in tech, if you're getting a master's degree in computer science, it's probably not going to teach you any more than you really like needed in undergrad, especially depends on like where you're coming from. So more or less you should get a master's degree in like Samantha was talking about with data science and analytics, or maybe math, stuff that's like applicable in which you can marry both the concepts of computer science and those things. On top of that, I would say like do not necessarily think you need a master's degree to actually get a job. It helps. It gives you what, like maybe like $8,000, $10,000 in a bump, but overall it's not the end all be all, and it depends on like how the economy is doing, how you feel about going back and getting a master's degree, because you're basically pushing off getting a job. It depends, unless you get a job first and then work towards getting your degree. But it's easier to go back to school than it is to join the workforce, but also you're going to have to join the workforce eventually, unless you can stay in school your whole life. I mean, do that. But you'll have to do that eventually. So make sure you understand why you're getting your degree. And if it's to like specifically get a job and not increase your like actual skill set, it probably isn't going to help you as much as you think, because then you'll just have like a master's degree, but you'll still be in a position that like it is a new grad position. So it depends on how you like really like take advantage of your degree. And especially like in a situation in which like maybe you didn't do so hot in undergrad and you want to shoot for like more prestigious companies and you think your GPA is going to sink you on that sense, then sure, do it. But also you have to consider like that's also an opportunity to network, because you're talking to older people who are also returning from, like, I would say personally, go get a couple of years experience and then come back for a master's degree, get someone else to pay for it. Because if you're ducking the experience aspect in the hopes that you'll get a job eventually, like you're going to stall out, and you might, it depends on how you feel about the general field overall. If like you're in it for the passion of like learning and solving hard problems and doing all the work, go get your master's. If you're really in it for the cash, just get out of school and go to work. It is just going to be easier for you to do that. It's going to be hard, but you'll save more money in the long run. And also, I work with people who have master's degrees, and sometimes they've been like, oh, you know what? I didn't really like need it that much. Like it doesn't like, it feels great if someone else pays for it. So get someone else to pay for it and not like have you put your own dime on that.
I just want to jump in here before we kind of get on a different Zoom. I'm all for master's degrees. I'm actually in the 5-year program at St. John's. So I'm getting a bachelor's in computer science and a master's in data science. The graduate classes I've taken in data science have been extremely helpful. Data mining and predictive modeling, web data mining, computer vision, those all really got me into machine learning. And those got me to work on projects involving that and actually helped me land basically 2 internships. So I definitely recommend it to everyone.
So-
I do have a question if
Oh yeah,
if
go.
we have enough time. Do you think that there's a difference, say, if you have an internship or full-time position by the end of your undergrad or not?
Yes,
There's an input in that.
there's a major difference because internships are a great trial period for companies. It is less costly. It is easier to hire. It's easier to get a return offer. You have to try really, really hard to screw up an internship, or your internship has to be really, really competitive and cutthroat, like maybe say banking, for you to screw up an internship. So it is way easier for you to get an internship and then get that full-time offer and maybe work there for a couple of years, depends on like how you feel about it. I was a person that did freelance in undergrad. I didn't have an internship, and I would say like I did experience like really like it was a hard barrier in a sense that like all the work that I did, even though it was like tangible work and like paying work, it wasn't like a quote unquote internship. So it was tougher to go and transition to like maybe a full-time because of the fact that like they had me as the contractor. So they'll stick me with the contractor position. And that's what I did when I graduated. I went back to my contractor position essentially.
Your advice would essentially be focus, not that it's anything difficult, but focus on having I don't know why my mic volume keeps going up. Focus on having an internship or full-time position before you actually get a master's, because you're going to need that tuition assistance or just that sort of security.
Yeah, if you can get that done, then like that's great. But that's also like I talked about with the different goals in mind. If you're like really passionate about like learning everything about CS and like solving hard problems, it will be no problem for you to hop straight into grad school. Like Faizan, he's doing like the 5-year program. Like it's probably no problem for him to like go and do those extra, like that extra year or those extra classes because he likes what he's doing. He's passionate about it. But like, let's say if you were really like just trying to get employed and like, just trying to make money, you're wasting your time because the passion's not there. The time you spend is not there. And you probably won't get as much out as versus like someone who really wants to like be there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for clarifying.
We can start with some of the questions the members sent over. So the first one is, so how did St. John's prepare you all for your workforce career?
I'll start. That's actually a really good question. I can only speak from the perspective of the cybersecurity program. So I would say honestly that for those of you currently in the cyber program, I would say that in terms of the undergrad courses, I feel that they do give a good basic understanding of the concepts in cybersecurity, the different, like what's the policy, what are all the different networking systems that are used, and how do these devices communicate with each other, and how should we protect them as security professionals. But I also feel that there is a gap between when you're sitting in the class and learning these concepts and when you're out there in the field. I feel that you learn more once you're out there in the field, when you're actually tasked to do things. I do feel like you learn much more on the job because the concepts that you're learning at St. John's, it's to me just the fundamentals. There's so much more to build on them, and I do feel that St. John's, it's good to just understand the fundamentals of cybersecurity, what it is. But I feel that the real learning you will get is when you're really out there on the job.
Yeah, St. John's definitely does prepare you for the fundamentals. And as she mentioned, I think you'll get the real experience and the real understanding once you're actually able to apply those things. Building an ATM project is only so helpful when you get out into the real world. But those core concepts definitely do come in handy as you continue to progress through your career.
I'll say, purely speaking from like St. John's CS, graduated 2019. I was done in December 2018, but entered in 2014. So through all of that, I'll say this is being recorded, so give or take, St. John's, I wouldn't say like provides like a very good hard bed for understanding what you're going to do in the real world. And give or take, there's some debates on whether or not college should do that, or should you learn how to learn and be great at that. That being said, I'll actually like sort of like interject it with like another question that was asked about like what was the most important class. I'll say like analysis of algorithms was my most important class, because even considering data structures and algorithms and advanced data structures, analysis of algorithms was my most important class because that was what showed up in the interviews. Those were the most that was the class that had the most impact on me because of like how like I interacted with like working with graphs or learning about Big O, or like just composing projects that would like I would see out there in an interview. And then when actually like getting to, because the interview that you do for your job is not what you actually do on the job. So basically the stuff that I learned was only applicable for so much, and there are some things that you'll have to learn on your own. And I feel as if it's up to the person to take the initiative to learn what they want to learn and be open to learning more because of the field that we're in. Especially depends on like what area of the field. So if you're in like web development, a lot of stuff is like constantly changing. And the best thing to do is have like a hard like fundamentals base, which I do not believe that St. John's actually provides like a hard fundamentals base. It's sort of like lackluster. So you'll have to like do a lot of initiative on your own. During undergrad, I also participated in hackathons. So hackathons were a great way of me not only interacting with different people, but also like figuring out how to like build a working project that not only was not going to be graded for like a grade, but like could not only possibly win something, but like, hey, hackathon, you get an internship out of it possibly. Like if a company is like working in their booths and they see like what you're working on and they work, or you use the company's API. So looking at those opportunities outside of school, because this is like the fundamentals are shaky. When I was an undergrad, I don't feel as if like I got the best education. I did a lot of the work myself, and that's that.
Yeah, and we have a very good question here by David. This was directed to Emily, but I think each of you can answer this. So Emily mentioned that you learned a lot more on the job than you will in classes. So are there any ways you'd recommend learning some of those things that you won't learn in classes? So what are some like resources that you use to learn things that you currently need for your job?
I can go, and I actually just wanted to echo something that was just said. Working in tech, it's an ever-changing industry. I know you use the example of web development, but in this, things are constantly advancing, things are constantly changing, and you have to be willing to learn new things. And it's not just in the classroom, it's supplementing everything that you do with Coursera classes, Udacity classes, online resources, YouTube, whatever's free. Finding ways to continue to advance your learning. And that also goes to David's question. For me, working in data science, Kaggle was incredibly helpful. Kaggle has a whole bunch of competitions that you really just enter. Some of them are for prize money, some of them are just to say you won. But those are really helpful because they teach you applicable skills. There are a whole bunch of, I mentioned Coursera, but there are certificates as well that you can go ahead and get. Those would probably be my suggestions for learning outside of work and learning outside of class.
So to echo what Samantha just said, YouTube is definitely your #1 friend, feel free, in terms of cybersecurity, definitely research. For example, if you don't know, okay, I learned about a domain controller, but I don't know what it is. In fact, even today at my job, I was studying up on some concepts, and I was just literally going onto YouTube and watching videos about domain controllers. So I would say definitely YouTube is your best friend. And once again, I would definitely echo that Security Plus certification sentiment. I think that's really important to gain an entry-level position. I highly recommend that. But when you're studying for that exam, study the material to understand it, not just to pass. Let's see. Oh, I think another really important thing is you learn a lot by reading. So definitely follow groups such as the Hacker News, Dark Web, Dark Reading. Even on LinkedIn, you can follow all these different cybersecurity news sources and get an understanding of what's going on, not in the US, but like worldwide. Like for example, Ukraine, I believe, what was it, CISA released something called Shields Up, which is basically how to harden your organization. So I think the most valuable resources out there is learning, reading, and definitely taking the Security Plus as well.
And I have something to add on to like the reading aspect, especially when you get to like big, like purely like tech companies, a lot of the documentation that's internal is amazing. Like there's so much that I'm learning that you legitimately cannot see in the outside world. So just like taking the time and reading through their docs, learning about like how like there's also like you could read the company's like press releases about like the way they implement some stuff, like the tech arms of like some companies, like Twitter puts out like a blog post every now and then about like how they implement some stuff, which is also great for interviews to learn more about like the nitty gritty of the company. One of the things I read about was how Twitter generates tweet IDs, and they have an algorithm called Snowflake. And the public version of the blog is not as robust as the private version of the blog, but I read the public version and it was still as good. And I talked about that during my interview process. So definitely when you get your job, like as you're learning, also use the resources inside the company. Like my last company, they had a Pluralsight membership to upskill yourself. So like I used that to learn like about Spring, about like all these things that like normally I would have to pay for, but they are investing in you as much as like they are being as much as you are being paid by them.
Right. And Kwesi, you mentioned a lot about your interviews. I'm wondering if each of you can really talk about what your interview processes were like. Were they mostly behavioral? Were they technical? Kind of walk us through that process of how you went through the interview and how you prepared for them.
So my interview approach was different from when I graduated immediately and from now that I have experience. At this point in time, as they say everywhere, entry level was like heavily saturated. So you have to make yourself stand apart. If you can be personable and talk to people, get a referral, and that'll help you out. If you just need to like wait in the door, give or take. Besides that, what I did in undergrad, I applied to like purely technical companies such as like, the Facebook, the Snapchat, like the Microsofts. And we all know where we go to school. So it's easily like screened if you're not coming from like that like CS program. But worth a shot either way. But in Liberty Mutual, I had like one technical question during that portion, and it wasn't even like a whiteboard. It was sort of like we're gonna design this thing together, we're gonna talk about this thing, and then mostly like it was like generally behavioral and talking about what's going on. And then I've had like there's a startup that does advertising called Bluecore, which we had 3 different rounds. First one, even the recruiter round, was a technical interview question, the classic reverse linked list, knocked that out. The second round was a behavioral question, which also snuck in like a nice little technical the systems question. And then the third and final round was an on-site. We're running like 5 hours with a 1 hour break in between, where we do 2 technical questions, 1 system design question, and 1 behavioral question. And then like there's another behavioral in between that where like you have lunch with whatever team you would be sitting in. So that would make them like try to figure out, get a good gauge of like who you are as a person if they want to work with you as a team. Very important thing that I didn't really learn at the time, but I've learned since like, you know, reapplying again, is to be like a personable person, be an active person, make someone want to be on a team with you. If you are a shitty person, no one wants to work with you. If you are a know-it-all, no one wants to work with you. So you may be a genius, you may be a savant, but if you're coming out of St. John's, be a good person. That's legitimately it. Be a good person. And I got more offers in my second round, my second time interviewing, where I ended up here. I got more offers by not only being better at interviewing, of course, but like I'll say like I talked to my manager and I talked to like people when I was talking to recruiters post interview. They're just like, yeah, the team liked you. You were a good person. They could see themselves working with you. Because when I interview people, on the checklist of like criteria is like, if you were to put this person on your team, could you actually work with them? Because if you can't actually work with them, why would you push that onto someone else? So yeah, that's basically it.
For my interview process for Verizon, it was relatively straightforward. I do have to say that all interview experiences at Verizon are different, really depending on the team that you are applying for. But for my specific role, it was a pre-recorded interview where I just sat in front of a computer, a prompt came up, and I had to answer the question. They gave me about 1.5 minutes to prepare. From there, I went on to a super day where I was interviewed by, I believe, a director and a senior manager. And that was a little bit behavioral and technical. I didn't have to do any whiteboarding or answer any coding questions verbally. It was really just understanding my technical ability, asking me, you know, what have I learned, asking them asking me to walk through my projects in detail. What would I change about my project if I could go back? How did I work on these teams? So that was my interview experience, at least with my current job. But I had a lot of different experiences. I interviewed with McKinsey, and I wouldn't even call it an interview because I had a technical exam before they even met me. They didn't want to meet me unless I did well on the technical exam. And that was a very tough technical exam. I interviewed for a startup, and my last round was the technical exam, and it was a take-home exam. They sent it to me, they gave me 24 hours to return it, and I gave it back. So it really just depends on the company, but the best way to prepare is, of course, Leak Code, HackerRank. For me, Kaggle was really helpful. Yeah, that's how I best prepared for my interviews, and that was my interview experience.
For mine, well, I'm just gonna give a general overview. So I would say in terms of cybersecurity interviews, I think honestly, I think for any interview in general, I think depending on the company, the interviews can go one way or another. So for me, I remembered this past summer, I did an internship at Cisco, and everyone knows how Cisco is one of those Fortune 400 companies, and those interviews are nerve-wracking. You go through so many rounds, and as opposed to if you're interviewing at a smaller company, you'll probably have 1 or 2. So in general, I think in terms of cybersecurity interviews, they're looking to make sure that you know your stuff. Understanding how can I speak to risk. I think risk is a huge part of the field, like business risk. Put yourself in terms of the business. How am I going to mitigate the business risk? And being able to explain the projects that you worked on from school or on your own or from a prior internship. They want to know what you did. Like, okay, how can he or she showcase what they did and bring it to my company? And besides the technical aspect, I think the interpersonal skills are also really important. They want to know if you worked with teams before, how well do you work with teams? And can you show leadership or ownership on projects?
Yeah, so speaking of projects, this is actually something that I always emphasize in our club meetings to work on, personal projects. So Sam, you also mentioned in your interviews you were asked about projects. So can you guys talk about some projects that you worked on and how that potentially helped you land your current job?
I would say that's why hackathons are such a great thing, because you show up and you get a group of people and you figure out and brainstorm on your like as a group to build something. And so like a couple of hackathon projects are on my were on my resume at the time, but I would say like my biggest project was pre-Supreme CAPTCHA additive. I wrote bots for Supreme, and I like talked about like the trouble of evading like bans, the trouble of like figuring out like what type of like I used the Lambda function, but the Lambdas sort of fell out of favor because they weren't quick enough and all of that. So having projects that you know the ins and out of help you like talk about it to like the people who are interviewing with you. And they like what you're obviously looking for is initiative and willingness to learn in an interview. Coming out of undergrad, they know you don't know anything. They 100% know that. You've never touched anything before, but they want to know that you will, like Emily was talking about before, you will take the initiative to figure out how something works. And if you have like a goal, even if it wasn't a goal set by you, you can like work towards achieving that goal. And that's what I used in my projects. Like I had a goal, I was trying to make money. And trying to make money, I had to beat out people who either were trying to use the buy Supreme manually or they were trying to use the bot too. So those were the goals I had in mind, and I used that to build out a project. Now as an experienced person, I don't have projects done. I mean, I have projects that I do for fun, but like it's nothing I put on my resume.
And for me, as much as I enjoy computer science, I'm truthfully not somebody that goes out of their way to build something. Kudos to you for building a bot. Sorry that they can't be used anymore. But for me, I really just put my projects from classes on there. And I made sure I did know the ins and outs of them because I worked on them. And I used my projects that were relevant to the job that I was applying for. I used projects from my data mining class. I used projects from my advanced database management class. And I spoke on those because those are what I had to showcase.
I would say one of the major projects I worked on during my internship at Cisco, I helped to build a lab from scratch. So that basically what I did in a nutshell was I was just working in vCenter, and I was just building up some Windows and Linux VMs and making sure that they were able to connect to each other. So I do feel that when you're working on your own labs, whether it's for an internship or on your own, it really does help you understand the hands-on aspects of the field. For instance, when you're working with VMs, you're looking at netstat, or you're even looking at the IP addresses of your VM. And in the real world, you have to understand how hosts communicate on a network. So I think working on these projects is really beneficial.
It's great. And we also have a very good question here that was asked by Sajid. So how do you guys deal with imposter syndrome? Given that the tech industry is so competitive, everyone is seemingly so smart. So how do you kind of deal with that?
I can go first. Actually, I am 6 months in my current role. And to be honest, I still feel that imposter syndrome. I think it's just natural for anybody, regardless of what field you're in. I mean, for me, I interact with senior advisors, CIOs or COOs. And it can be intimidating when you're like, hey, oh, they know so much more than me. Or you have that misconception where you think you're supposed to be the security expert and explain everything. But to be honest, when you're new in the field, someone like me, I don't even know half the stuff out there. So I think the best way to deal with imposter syndrome is just to have confidence in yourself. And confidence can really go a long way. So for me, I consult with clients. So as I kept having calls with them, I would just pretend that nobody senior was on the call. I would just go in, go through my agenda, make sure my client is happy, and then go about my day. So I would say that confidence really goes a long way to overcome imposter syndrome. And if you think about it, everybody started out in the same place as you are. So going a long way.
I guess I can go next. I am only about 9 months into my job now. And I remember my very first day being absolutely terrified. I was one of 2 women on a team. I was the only Hispanic on my team. And I was the least tenured person by a long shot on my team. Everyone on my team had 5+ years of experience. I am a fresh college grad, no internship experience. And I truthfully felt like I did not belong there. I would sit in meetings with my camera off and I wouldn't say a word. I was just absolutely intimidated. Sitting in the same meeting with people who have 2 master's degrees, PhDs, 20 years of experience, it is incredibly intimidating. And as I go through my job, I've come to realize that, as Emily said, confidence is incredibly important. And I'm not the most confident person in my technical skills, but I do understand that I do have knowledge that is useful. And if I didn't, they wouldn't have hired me. And that is something that you need to consistently remember. You were given an offer because they saw potential in you. You were welcome to the team because they saw value that you added, and you really just need to embrace that. You belong there, you have a seat at the table, and use that seat to the best of your ability. Don't be afraid to speak up, don't be afraid to ask questions. They'll make you stand out in a positive way. If you don't know something, by asking a question, you're showing that you're willing to learn. And that makes people happy. These people with PhDs, they're happy to talk about what they do all day, every day. So ask questions and be willing to learn, and it won't make you look dumb. It'll make you stand out in a very positive way.
Yeah, essentially just echoing what Samantha said, because it's really like they hired you for a purpose. You obviously passed your interview. I mean, unless you cheated your interview, then you have a well-deserved, reason for imposter syndrome. But always be like ready to learn. You have to understand that you don't know what you don't know, and that through that you can gain a better understanding. Like the best thing you could tell somebody after they ask you a question is, I don't know right now, but I will go find out. Like I'll go figure it out. I'll go talk to someone, or I don't know right now, but I think I know somebody who I could talk to if we want to get in contact with that, especially in like situations in which like you have to talk to a lot of people. You're like liaisoning between different groups of people. They will definitely ask you questions you don't know, and like they're asking questions because they don't know. So like, why are you having imposter syndrome, which is a perfectly valid thing, but you should also feel as if like you understand that you don't have as much experience off rip, but you bring something to the table, like Samantha was saying, and that you'll have the opportunity to learn more, because even like Emily was saying, they all started somewhere. They all started at like starting line, and you're just a couple yards behind them, and it's not that big of a deal.
Right. I kind of had something I wanted to ask. So if you could go back in time to when you were a freshman at St. John's, what are some things you would do differently to kind of make the most out of your college experience?
Like just talk to your professors and use the resources that you have. Also take advantage of the resources that you have and like use those accordingly. Even though you may, like, just like with imposter syndrome, you feel like you're the only one experiencing something, but it might be that like a lot of your peers, classmates, like experience that, or 100% work on being more comfortable in like who you are, which then helps you build upon like what's going on. So it helps greatly if you use your resources.
Yeah, just to echo that, professors are people too. I wish that from my freshman year, I would have made an effort to be closer to my professors. I didn't start doing that until my senior year. And the professors that I did become close with, I had a professor try to hire me after graduation, and I wasn't even interested in networking. And it's because he was an adjunct professor. He taught one class on a Saturday. And the rest of the time he worked full time. So be friends with your professors, especially the ones that have industry experience. They know what it's like to be in your shoes. They can speak to everything, and the industry has probably changed since they've been there, but they still have a lot of wisdom, and I'm sure that they would be happy to share it.
I also echo that same sentiment. Definitely network with your professors from freshman year. And definitely, since that's your first year of starting out that major, really research your major and see if it's a really good fit for you. I know in IT, there's so many different paths you could take. Even if you feel that, hey, I'm not enjoying the class, definitely talk to a professor about it because they've been in your shoes before. And I think freshman year is also a great time to even get to network with your peers. Everyone's in the same boat as you.
I guess we have time for one last question here before the Zoom meeting ends. So what advice would you give to students who are looking to land their first tech job, but don't really have any relevant experience? You know, what should be their course of action?
I would like to take this one really quickly. Do not be ashamed of not having any relevant experience. I worked full-time at a retail store. I worked at Sprint, which later became T-Mobile post-merger. It'll all relate eventually. I was part of a nonprofit called Streetwise Partners that taught me all of the job readiness skills that I needed. Resume, interviews, networking, everything under the sun, except the technical portion, but they taught me everything about the behavioral portion. And they really taught me how to leverage all of the undergraduate experience that I had and marry it with my customer service experience. There is a way to do it, I promise you. If anyone has questions about that, happy to help out. But do not be ashamed if you do not have technical experience. Be confident in what you have, and it will take you far. External projects, willingness to learn, it will all go a long way.
I think it's easier to break it down into situations in which what you're aiming for and what you want. So if you want something that is like purely software, like let's say working at like Amazon or like what's that? The database framework companies, like I mean even like Cockroach Labs in NYC, they have like a really strong like engineering like team, and they're like purely software. You have to understand where you're coming from and where you want to go, and have a goal in mind, have an understanding of who you are and what you need to do to build that up. So when you're doing something such as approaching like a technical company, you want to make sure your technical chops are up there. You want to like cracking the coding interview, algo design manual. You want to like knock those out versus like if you're approaching like working at a big bank, they care if you're smart, but they care if you're smart in a conventional sense, and also they care if you're personable, because most likely they're going to put you in an analyst role, which means you're going to be after talking to people who aren't as technical as you, and they don't know how technical you are. So you also have to make sure you are more personable than you are technical. And that's why when you like getting your first job out there, you have to like understand what you're actually looking for. You have to understand what a tech job is. Even like I applied to like, let's say 75 companies after getting out of undergrad. I received like maybe 3 or 4 offers. But the bad thing about that is I was directionless. I just applied to like a lot of places, like hoping to get something, trying to figure something out. I need to get a job. I just graduated. So that led me to having like interviews that were just like, I just bombed because I didn't approach it with a directed mindset of like understanding that, oh, this is a technical company. So like there is a high chance that I will be asked a graph question. Like If it's not, then they might not even care about the fact that you know what a graph is or if it exists, something like that. So now came to my like current company, current role, like I was really directional. Like I applied 13 places, 3 of them were referrals, 10 of them were cold. I got offers of 6, and it's because like I had a goal in mind that I wanted to work at like a purely technical company that built software, and that's why I code 60% of the day, because I don't want to talk to a lot of people. I don't want to be in an analyst role, and I knew that going in. I had that in my previous job where I had to talk to more people. I had to do more of the agile like thing. I wasn't like heads down coding. So knowing that going in, I understood that. So I had a goal in mind and what I was working for, and I built up my technical chops. And when it got time to like, when I was asking for referrals, like there are a couple places I didn't get referrals because they were just like straight up just like, nah, dude, like I don't think you're there yet. Which like you have to understand that, like you have to understand where you are and where you're gonna go and where you want to be. And the more you understand yourself, the easier a tough a time you'll be great with getting rejections, and also you'll be great in getting your wins.
Awesome, Quasi. Thank you for saying that. We only have like a minute, 20 seconds left, so I want to thank you all for taking the time out to join this meeting. I know some of you send your LinkedIns in the chat, so for our members here, definitely connect with them. I hope ask them questions that we couldn't get to ask here. And yeah, thank you again for all of you for joining. Really appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. That was super informative.
Appreciate y'all having me. Catch you later.